With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Our buddy from over yonder, Ben Harris, is back. He rolls around in the halls of Parliament over there in Westminster, so we always enjoy talking to him. Good to see you, buddy. Glad to have you back on the program.
Thank you, Andrew. Good to be on as always.
I love having you. We got a couple things we're going to talk about, but let's start with the politics side of it. We covered a couple weeks ago with our buddy Jack. There's been a few things that have been in Rishi Sunak's control. There's a few things that are not in his control. All of them seem to be converging all at once lately. We've had the school scandal with the concrete, which really was, it was bad for a lot of reasons, but kind of, it was almost like a breaking point where just everything kind of hit all at once. And, the streams all crossed. It just, you start screwing with people's kids in schools. That goes beyond the politics. Now everybody's mad, that sort of thing. Yeah. Now, on top of that, we got this Chinese spy scandal. For the folks that weren't really following, in America, we're really touchy about China. We know undue influence of China and Russia and others. We know London is kind of a hotbed for a lot of this stuff. Walk folks through this Chinese spy scandal that has now enveloped a lot of the conversation. Yet another bad thing folks don't want to talk about, but just get everybody up to speed on it.
So, essentially, someone who does my job was discovered to have been, or was accused, allegedly has been spying for China and was arrested back in March.
Not you. Like, you have your flaws, but just to be clear, this is not you. You did not do this.
No. But someone who does my sort of job, who does, the same sort of job title, who he was arrested back in March for allegedly spying for China. He denies allegations, and there's a current investigation into that. And there have also been previous cases, I think, of Chinese spies working or with parliament passes or working close to MPs. And I think because we have so many MPs, we've got 650 MPs, it's not hard for China to slip one or two through the net. And that's the problem we've been having. In China also, we are a lot more skeptical of China now than we used to be. Under George Osborne and David Cameron, the government was a bit too close to China. And it's good that in the years since, we have realised that was a big mistake. But yeah, Rishi Sunak is a bit of a China dove. He's not very hawkish on China. He's not nowhere near as close as David Cameron and George Osborne were, but he is reluctant, it seems, to take a hard stance on China, which is unfortunate.
Now, how much of this? Let's be fair to the Prime Minister for just a second. His background, he's a businessman. He's probably one of the wealthiest prime ministers y'all have ever had, independently wealthy. He was educated in the States. He's very, how much of that's just kind of his worldview and personality? I know he's dovish on it. I don't know that he thinks of it first and foremost as a foreign policy issue. I think he thinks of China in a business sense, but that is a viewpoint that is widespread across the globe where they just see China in a sort of a business sense and don't naturally go to them as a geopolitical foe. Is that part of the problem with his outlook and why it's clashing when you have a story of this? Like, no, they're just not, a huge economy to do business with. They also have a dictatorship that does a lot of really malicious things in the world.
I think there is definitely an element of that, and that's a good point. But also, I think this is what you have to remember with Rishi Sunak and almost everything he does, is that he was Chancellor, and he has what we call Treasury brain. The Chancellor, the Treasury has a very odd way of looking at things, and of course he used to be Chancellor, and I think he essentially sees China with his treasury hat still on, which is money, and that's all they really care about, the Treasury. And I think he has brought that to number 10 somewhat. So he sees, like you said, he sees China as a business thing. And I think part that's to do with his upbringing and where he comes from and sort of the money he's been involved in, but also partly I think that's because he was Chancellor for several years. And I think he sees it as, he looks at things like Theresa May, for example, was a good example of someone on the other side. She was Home Secretary for 6 years, and I think she often saw things through a security lens. Rishi Sunak sees things through a business sort of treasury lens, and I think that's what you have to look at when you look at prime ministers, is what their previous jobs were.
Yeah, and this isn't the first China headline. Was about a year or two ago, we went through the whole thing with the UK where they were trying to extract Huawei and the Chinese influence out of some of the infrastructure with the Wi-Fi and the
Yeah.
broadband and that sort of thing. So this is something that's kind of fresh in people's mind. When you talk about treasury brain, this is where these things start combining, where he was in charge of things. Schools fell under his preview. The previous controversies with China and the Wi-Fi and the broadband, that fell under his preview. Now this is another thing that was previously under his preview that's coming back to bite him as prime minister. This happens to politicians, all politicians, when they're on the wrong side of the hill of political opinion. This stuff just seems to be avalanching on Rishi Sunak right now. Like, if it can go wrong, it goes wrong, and it's showing up.
In fact, yeah, but in fairness to him, actually, the concrete stuff is obviously is partly his responsibility, but also it's from what I can gather, it's a long running issue which successive governments on both sides have failed to deal with, and he's just been unlucky that it's just come out under his watch. So I wouldn't blame him. I blame him partly for that, but I actually blame previous governments just as much. So I think he's been very unfortunate there. But you're right. It doesn't rain, it pours, and it does seem to be doing that for Sunak in the last year or so since to become prime minister.
You raised an interesting point a little bit ago, Ben Harris. People argue about the parliamentary system and the American system and how different they are, good and bad. There's points for both. You just mentioned there are a ton of MPs. You have something like 240 more MPs than we have members of Congress, and of course, population-wise, much bigger country, much bigger. Here's a term Rishi Sunak, right-sized. Does Parliament need right-sized or rethought? Because it seems like y'all got a lot of MPs, and is it unwieldy? Does there need to be some reform there? Is anybody even thinking about that?
Yes, actually, it's funny you should mention that. There is going to be reform on that. So I think at the next election, there's been new boundaries drawn, and I think Parliament will be actually reduced from 650 MPs to 600 MPs. So it's going to lose 50 MPs, which of course isn't a massive amount, but we are cutting it down a bit, and that's good. But of course, that is leading to problems now where certain seats are being, in the boundary changes, certain seats like your district changes, certain seats are being abolished or merged into one. And you've got a situation now where two sitting MPs, perhaps even the same party, are going for the same seat. So that has led to some issues there. My boss's seat isn't really changing much, but there are lots of seats where they are changing quite a lot, and MPs are losing out.
Yeah, Ben Harris joining us. This leads us to the elephant in the room that's hanging over all of UK politics right now. When's there going to be a general election? We've been talking about this before, and I think the calculus for the Conservatives and Rishi Sunak, I think their calculus has now changed. They were trying to just kind of wait it out and find some kind of sliver of good news and then call an election and hope for the best. Are we in rip the Band-Aid off mode now where they're just going to have to do it? You've had 12 years now of them in power. There's just a
13.
lot of inertia. Are we in rip the Band-Aid off mode now with them, that they're just going to have to kind of pick their spot and take their medicine? Is that how they're starting to see it?
I'm not sure. I think at the moment, I think they're still in. Let's wait. Let's just keep it as long as possible, because I think the main issue still is cost of living and inflation, which is going down finally, but it's not going down as fast as I think they'd have hoped. So I think they will just wait it out, and I think inflation's the big thing. And I think at the moment it's about 6% possibly. I'm not sure exactly what the level is. It's definitely a lot lower than it was a few months ago, but it's taken a while to filter down. So I think they will probably. From what I've heard, it seems to be autumn next year will be the year. Usually it's May. Elections are usually done in May when they're called, but I think it can be up to any point up to January 2025. So I think it will be autumn 2024 is looking likely, unless there's loads of good news between now and then, and they just decide to do it then. I don't know.
Yeah, Ben Harris joining us. All right, let's hit a couple of the big issues going on in the UK. The immigration thing is still there and just is not going to go away. There's a macro problem and a micro problem with the immigration debate. The larger issue is the UK has a demographics problem and a population problem, and then they have a political problem where immigration's a really hot button issue. That's a bad combination, my friend.
Yeah, no, it is, and I mean, our demographic problem is similar to many European countries. I don't think people realise that birth rates are just not what they used to be, and that without we do need at least some level of immigration. But I think the bigger problem actually now is not so much immigration levels; it's the illegal migrant crossings, which actually, those are two separate issues. The legal immigrants that come in is a separate issue from the illegal migrant crossings over the channel, and I think the government has been severely damaged by the fact they've just failed to get a grip on the migrant crossings. But a part of it is out of their own hands, because, for example, they tried the Rwanda plan where they were going to send illegal migrants that cross the channel to Rwanda, so their cases could be heard there. But the European Court of Human Rights put a stop to that. So the government has its hands tied a little bit, and I don't really know how they get around it.
Ben Harris joining us. Another issue, again, not unique to the UK, certainly, but one that's a problem. You talked a little bit about inflation, and it has a lot to do with this, but big problems with things like housing, cost of living. We've talked to you. You've been on this program for almost 3 years now. Every time you're on here, it seems like we got to talk about cost of living. Look, you're one of those. You work in Parliament. You have a pretty long commute when you want to go home and see the family. You have to deal with things like this. Where are we at with the housing and living crisis? Because it doesn't seem like it's really improving. The inflation's going up and down. That'll affect it a little bit. But the core problems of just not having enough housing in the right places and the infrastructure thereof doesn't seem to have really improved much.
Well, this actually touches on a key issue. So this, in my opinion, supersedes inflation. It supersedes government. It supersedes both parties. We have a problem in this country of NIMBYism and a low growth mindset. People do not want things built in their own backyards, and that is the simple fact. And it's so hard. The planning system here gives too much power to people who want to stop development in the local areas. And we've had decades of low house building, which has not been able to meet demand, and that's why we have a housing crisis right now. It's an issue. It's an issue that goes way beyond the current government or any government, and actually, I think it's almost a societal problem. People in this country are they're just people. Lots of people who just want to block things, and we don't like change or any sort of growth or development or building, and it's hard to get stuff built. I mean, I think look at HS2. It's taken so many years just to go through consultations there, and it's barely. The progress is so slow. Heathrow, we're supposed to have an extra runway there about a decade ago, and we're still going through these laborious legal consultations, and it's just, it's a societal problem, and I don't really know how to get around it. Yeah,
for the American and the international audience that aren't familiar with it, where's the bottle gap at that? Because it's one thing for people to not want to change, but there's a legal. Is it at the local council levels? Is it at the local government levels? Is it the larger government? Because the way England and the UK specifically is run, those local governments have enormous power when it comes to things like development and growth and build. It's just a little bit of a different system. Kind of walk folks through that.
Well, so local councils and local governments do have a lot of power to stop things. And there was a particular ridiculous example recently where there's a military base. I think it was actually in my county of Kent, and they were training Ukrainian soldiers there. Because obviously we're training lots of Ukrainian soldiers, and then they'll go out to Ukraine, and we give them the training that they need. And there was some people complained that their local military base, their live fire drills were too loud, and so they had to cut down on the number of live fire drills they were doing with these Ukrainian soldiers because of some complaints. And it's just insane that our whole foreign policy, and we've done this well, is geared around helping Ukraine. And a local council has basically been able to stymie some of that because of the the system, and it's absurd.
Yeah, don't let those folks ever live anywhere near Fort Bragg now, Fort Liberty. They would not enjoy
exactly.
all the live fire that you can hear for miles, because that thing's the size of Rhode Island. Ben Harris joining us. One more thing on the UK politics, and then we'll move off it. But not a lot of talk, but a lot of our friends that we talk to, your peer group that's a little bit younger than me, is there a danger of Britain having a little bit of a brain drain? Because a lot of they're already talking about trying to reform maybe how university exams and things like that are done. It seems like a lot of that rising working class, the upper classes, the educated class, a lot of them are starting to think about maybe going abroad. They seem a little stymied. This is where that housing issue really starts hitting, because you get to be 25 to 30, you don't want to be living with mom and dad anymore, and a lot of them are having to just out of not even having anywhere to go. Is there a danger in that? Because if you're going to have demographic problems, if you start having a brain drain out of that class of folks, that's going to perpetuate a lot of other problems. Is there any movement to kind of start addressing some of that? Because that's your own very peer group. You've seen some of this.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely I've definitely seen people my age. There's a growing sort of sense of, well, this country doesn't offer much for young people, and wages here are relatively low, especially compared to the US. Wages here are ridiculously low, and but are the government doing anything about it? No, because at the end of the day, it's the old people that vote, and all the parties, just to a certain extent, are in hock to sort of homeowning pensioners, and they always will prioritise them. So, for example, we've got this thing called the triple lock, which is that state pensions have to rise by, I think it's the rate of inflation, something else, and basically whichever rate is high is what that rises by, and the government are still not abolishing the triple lock. The opposition are not going to abolish the triple lock, and it's just essentially they in terms of what the government offers to young people, they offer very little, whereas pensioners do get a lot. They get a lot of, and also I understand some pensioners are in poverty, but they do get, pensioners as a whole, even ones that are quite well off, do get a lot of benefits that they simply don't need. And the government has always been very geared to, some people describe the UK as like a retirement home of nuclear weapons, and I think that's a great way of putting it. We are a retirement home of nuclear weapons. We are set up around the elderly, and there's just simply nothing for young people.
Yeah, you're not the only country that we've got, of course, our own issues with, things like Social Security here in America. That's going to, it's a time bomb waiting to go off. So It's not unique, but y'all are definitely going to have to deal with that. Ben Harris joining us. Okay, buddy, let's fight about it. Rishi Sunak decided to come out and advocate for a ban for the Bully XL dogs. Now, pit bulls are already banned in the UK, from what I understand. This is a new one. Look, I'm a pit bull owner. I got one. Let me start here, though. Before we get into the particulars, was there any version of this that's not a floundering politician pandering for a cheap pop in the press? Because that's kind of how that's felt before you even get into the details of it.
Now, I've been a big critic of Rishi Sunak, and I'm criticising him for lots of things, but this was a good decision. My criticism of him would be he should have done it earlier, because these dogs, and this is a particular sub-breed of the pit bull, as I understand it. So this is not. It wouldn't be your dog. I don't think would even come under this breed. It's basically these American XL bully dogs are, from what I understand, they were introduced a few years ago, and about half of them are descended from the same dog, the same violent dog. And it's basically that they're very inbred, and it's a very, as I say, it's a subset of the pit bull. It's a very particular subset, niche subset here in the UK, and they're responsible for about half of all attacks on humans and other dogs, despite comprising less than 1% of the UK population. And that is a huge statistical. It's ridiculous. I mean, they dwarf all other dogs in terms of how dangerous they are, and there's been calls to ban them for a while now, and I think it's just reached. There's been a few attacks, and I think it's just reached fever pitch now, and the government realised it had to do something. You're probably right. It probably was done because they're floundering, and they wanted to just latch onto something that might give them some popularity. But nonetheless, it was the right thing to do, because this is a very dangerous dog breed, and people don't realise that it doesn't matter how well you train them. These particular dogs are inherently aggressive, and they were bred for aggression and fighting. And there have been lots of cases of well-behaved dogs like this who have just snapped one day randomly and killed a toddler or killed an adult. And I don't really see why should we have this situation continuing. They kill disproportionately, and there's no need for it.
Yeah. So this particular breed, which is bred in the UK, they started, as far as we can tell, sometime in the 90s. Again, I'm an owner of a pit bull that would not fall under this specific ban. It would fall under the wider ban, though, because it is a American Staffordshire. Here's the deal with this. I get it. You have individual dogs that get aggressive. They have to be euthanized. I get that. I had to euthanize one of my dogs years ago because they got brain tumor thing, just started acting weird. You just have to put them down. There's nothing you can do about it because they can get aggressive and dangerous.
Yeah.
I don't like the bans of the breed, even though I understand this breed did not decide to do this. They were designed by a human being to do this.
Yeah, it's not their fault. No.
Yeah, you have a breed. Anytime you go and people here want to do a pit bull ban in America, you hear it from time to time. There's never ever been an example of dog breed that did something untoward that if you don't go far enough, you find the malfeasance and or neglect and or bad behavior of a human being somewhere in there. So I think we go to the bans too quick without dealing with the human behavior. I get UK's different. I'm not going to bash y'all's system because it's a little different. I understand this is a very specific extreme example of it, which is a little different than just the wider, breed bans we see in America. Yeah. But I think it's worth pointing out, look, these are human beings that decided to make these dogs be this way. That's the behavior you should be targeting legally.
Yeah, certainly, and any ban would have to have a focus and a crackdown on these breeders that breed this stuff, because we have to obviously tackle the problem at source. Because obviously, what we don't want to happen is this dog breed to be banned, and then 10 years down the line, some nefarious breeders come up with some other dog, which is also just as dangerous. Because as you say, it's not the dog's fault; it's the breeder's fault. And we do have to tackle the root causes of it. And I just hope that the legislation does do that. And I hope that it's successful in that, and that it's hard for criminals and those types to get around the ban.
Yeah, Ben Harris joining us. Okay, it's not all doom and gloom in the UK, though. There are some good things going. You're in Parliament. You're plugged in. Give folks, especially those of us across the pond who are looking for any kind of a relief from our own news, so we look at yours. Give us one or two things to look in the headlines, some positive news that's coming out of the UK, some good things that are actually happening, bounce this all, because it kind of looks like y'all and us are going to be having election season at the same time. We're not going to get the usual relief of making fun of the other because we're going to have a hot mess at the same time. Give us two or three good headlines to be looking for in the coming days.
I think one of the good things, it's not a headline as such, more just as a general situation, is that despite all the issues we have, compared to mainland Europe, we're still quite good at being resistant to extremist parties. So you look at France, for example. Marine Le Pen is probably the favourite to be the next president of France. The National Rally Party are far right, hard right. They are definitely extreme. And likewise in Germany, the AfD, they're also extremists, and they're getting 20-30% in the polls occasionally, I think. And likewise, they've got a far left party at the left, they're called, and they also get about 10% in the polls. And we don't have that here. So here it's Conservatives or Labour. As much as I rip on Conservatives and Labour, both parties, neither of them are extreme. Certainly not Labour under Starmer. As much as I don't like Starmer, he's not like Corbyn. He's not anti-Semite. He's not extremist. And I feel like in terms of extremism, we still are quite resistant to that. When there's lots of countries in Europe where they do have growing extremist parties on far left and far right, we do tend to resist that. And obviously we've got an unpopular Tory government. But what will that lead to? It will lead to a centre-left Labour government. And when they're unpopular, we'll get a centre-right Tory government. And we just don't have the same kind of tendency to flip towards extremes as a lot of countries do. And that's a good thing. And we've still managed to weather that quite well.
Yeah, Ben Harris, always enjoy catching up with you, my friend. Let folks know where they can follow you and keep up with you till we get you back on Hertel again. The next time something crazy happens over there, we got to talk about.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Ben Harris, appreciate you, my friend. We'll talk soon. I'm going to link to all this. We'll put his Twitter up there as well. Take care, buddy.
Thank you. Thanks. See you later.
Yes, sir.
All the music on Hertel is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.